Hey, welcome to the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute with your host, the alchemist of Indiana's Black Forest, Alan Bishop. Hey, this channel is all about home distilling and legal distilling. If you've got questions, reach out to us in the comments below, social media, or via bishopshomegrown@gmail.com. And don't forget to check out thealchemistcabinet.com. Phone's all wobbly because of the stand that it's on. I apologize. Anyways, a great question here about corn breeding, and a very detailed question. I'm going to try to touch on this because I know that finally home distillers as well as professional distillers are getting more interested in having their own corn varieties and the breeding that can go into that. And listen, guys, plant breeding when it comes to corn can be as easy as you want to make it or as hard as you want to make it. You can get really, really geeky about corn, and even just in specific instances, right? What are you interested in? You interested in flavor? You interested in drought tolerance? Are you interested in any of the horticultural traits of it, protein content, starch content, etc., right? 1,000,001 rabbit holes to go down, and the corn genome is huge. The flavor diversity of corn is massive beyond anything that I think most Americans realize. So I'll read this question, and I'm going to have to kind of break it down as I go. I'll read through it once, and I'll break it down after that and get into all the particulars as I go. I love talking about corn. For those of you who followed me for a long time, you know I grew up on a tobacco farm, and in my 20s I converted it over to a ecologically grown, basically organic without certification farm, and that's what led me back into distillation that I'd grown up with, because distillation is inherently agricultural, and you realize that when you become a farmer. You become the operative farmer distiller, as it were, as a home distiller. So this comes from Hill Valley Farm. Alan, I appreciate the wealth of knowledge you readily share on the podcast, YouTube, and elsewhere. I have a small farm specializing in pastured pigs. After growing non-GMO corn for a few years, I've been trialing open-pollinated field corn for feed. I began home distilling 5 years ago, beginning with rum and now focusing on bourbon and experiments under the broad whiskey category. I have picked some unique OP corns to trial for whiskey over the past couple of years, and also enjoy comparing nutritional tests between them. The idea of selecting for my own regionality and taste preference, as you encourage, is a pursuit of mine. I ponder a dream of contract distilling unique yearly harvest and having a small on-farm tasting room. I live in northern Michigan, and in parentheses, Lower Peninsula Troll, and our growing season is short in the scheme of the Corn Belt. Typical successful hybrids are 83 to 87 days to maturity. This somewhat limits the open-pollinated options for growing, more so dent than flint varieties, because dent corns tend to be longer season than flint corn varieties. So I was looking for techniques to decrease maturity length. In particular, I grew Silver King, which is 100 days last year, but it didn't fully mature. I marked ears that tasseled earlier and also saved ears that were closer to ripening when it frosted. In several articles, you mentioned butt end kernels decrease length of season when subsequently planted. I intend to trial this next year, but I was wondering if you might elaborate on your experience. How many days difference are we talking? Butt, middle, and tip. Any other tips for changing maturity, crossing and longer maturity ears with short, etc.? It seems that in general you talk about adding genetic diversity with crossing many varieties versus selecting within varieties, but I assume you've needed to keep some varieties pure for interest/stock. Do you have a long enough growing season you can stagger plantings so pollination doesn't overlap? I don't have much wiggle room here, so trying to consider my options. I've read about bagging and hand pollinating as well. There's also the patience factor and just knowing I have to pick and choose over many seasons. Any tips are appreciated. So much like I approach distilling, I always approached my farming and my plant breeding from a practical perspective, because corn, for example, it's been around several thousand years. And the people who bred that corn and selected it over the years, they didn't go to school, they didn't do the bagging and all that stuff. You can do that, and I have done that, and it's a lot of work, but you do get results out of it. Me, I'm a synthetic OP guy. So what synthetic means is synthetic is a population. This is the way that old-fashioned, old-school landrace plant breeding happened hundreds of years ago, where you're taking these wide swaths of genetic diversity, putting them together, selecting for what does best, and selecting for what tastes best based on what does best in your region and your garden and what tastes best on your plate as food, right? So you've got a few options here. So you are on the right track with the Silver King thing and selecting those tip kernels. So what he's talking about in there is, I did a video before where I talked about how you can move the season for corn just a little bit, one direction or the other, later or earlier. When you select your seed from corn, the traditional way to do it is to only save the middle section, because that's your average days to maturity. This is based on the tasseling as well as the pollination of the corn with the silk, and how quick those silks develop, and when and where they develop the kernel, right? So the later season stuff that's on the very butt ends does not develop, or it develops last. That's what I'm getting, or not last, I'm sorry, it develops first. The tip stuff develops last. But ironically, you save those butt tips, right? Your season, you can add as much as 10 days to the season, make it a longer season corn. On the tip, you save that, even though it's what develops last, it's actually going to move your season up by 10 days. So you can shorten your season by 10 days. This doesn't happen overnight. This is literally years and years and years and years and years and years and years of selection. And 10 days is optimistic, right? You can be lucky if you ever see it, maybe 3, 5, 6 days, something like that, right? And that's years and years of selection. So I have kept open pollinated lines and kept them pure. Not a whole lot of them. Now, one of the things that I've done here with all my varieties, because I am in the Corn Belt, they grow a lot of corn here in southern Indiana, and I have a lot of neighbors that grow corn. The interesting thing about corn pollen is most of it drops within 20 feet of the corn stalk. And, even though it's a light pollen, it can travel up to 2 miles. Most of it drops close to the corn stalk. My version of keeping purity with, say, Amanda Palmer or Elise is to select my seed from the center of my cornfield. The bigger the cornfield, the wider it is, the more rows there are, the more berry there is. So I don't select my seed from the outside rows of corn. I always go to the center because I know I'm going to have less cross-pollination there. I also select against yellow kernels as much as possible, because most of the field corn grown here is yellow. If I see yellow show up, I know that I've got a cross that I don't want in there. What I'm big on, again, is those synthetic populations. And what those populations were, as I kind of mentioned earlier, is where people would take all that genetic diversity, put it together, and then select on the average. So one of the things that I would recommend for you, if you want to really develop your own corn variety, and I recommend this for every distillery in the United States. If you have a distillery in the United States, even in Alaska, if you're going to make a corn-based whiskey, there's a corn that will grow for you. Maybe not always reliably every year, but every distillery that makes any corn-based whiskey should have their own variety of corn, in my opinion. If they have the acreage to grow it, and or they have somebody that can pay to grow it, why not have your own unique corn for your distillery? Not just something that's bought off the shelf like Bloody Butcher, whatever else is out there, but crosses that you've made yourself. We've had great luck with that at my distillery, as has Widow Jane, etc. Lisa Wicker worked on that for years and years too. And I've been able to do some pretty cool things with corn. But what I would suggest is look into those Flint varieties that you were talking about. You'll find that there's a lot of Flint diversity left, obviously, out in the more western arid states, and there's quite a bit out in the East Coast. Those varieties are going to run anywhere from 65 to 90 days on average. Pick stuff that's within about a 20-day pollination period of one another. Mix it all together, year one. Plant it on the worst field that you have with no fertilizer or anything, right? Even plant it early. Plant it 5-6 days earlier than corn should be planted in your region. Whatever survives that, right? Whatever comes up from that cold weather and that cold ground, now that has some cold tolerance. You move your season back a little bit. I've done this with Amanda Palmer many times for about 17 years so that I can plant it a little earlier. It's a little hardier, and I'll miss pollination of the people who plant later here that are commercial farmers. Whatever comes up, take good care of it, go back in and replant whatever didn't come up. Keep doing that year over year for 3 or 4 years, right? Until you've got a decent amount of seed stock. Even if you end up with just one cob that first year, you save all the seed off that cob and replant it and keep selecting. You're going to have enough genetic diversity there from all the different crosses that have happened in that field to keep that variety going. After you start getting in the direction that you want to go, as far as, hey, this will deal with low fertility, it'll deal with moist, cold soil, whatever selection criteria you're looking for there as far as agronomics go, and maybe you've been able to taste a little bit of it in the form of grits or cornbread and go, this has good flavor to it, then you start fertilizing your field. Then you start taking a little bit better care of the corn, and you start paying attention to the genetic diversity a little bit closer and selecting over time for what you want, right? And within that, you have a huge range of maturity dates, right? You had a 20-day swing in there of different varieties that may or may not have pollinated all at the same time or separately from one another or alongside one another, and all these complex crosses. From that, all you need is 1 or 2 great cobs of corn representing elite plants within the field with very unique traits. And then now you have something cool that matches your days to maturity, your flavor profile, and your agronomics. Not only are you training the corn, but the corn is training you. You're learning each other's habits. You're learning each other's farming methodology. You're learning what each of you likes, and you have something really unique and really, really different. I know that was kind of rambling. I get very passionate about corn. That's corny. Haha, see what I did there? If that didn't clear up your questions, let me know and I will do a better job. And I'll be glad to even talk to you on the phone about this if it's something you're really interested in. So reach out to me, guys, with all your distilling related questions. bishopshomegrown@gmail.com, thealchemistcabinet.com, as well as any social media out there and the YouTube comments below. I love you. Have a great one.